Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a video called The Truth About Same-Sex Marriage. Somehow it managed to be over half an hour long. I'm not sure why that's necessary. The truth about same-sex marriage is simply that sometimes boys like boys, and sometimes girls like girls. So girls who like girls might want to marry girls, and boys who like boys might want to marry boys. That, right there, is the whole truth about same-sex marriage. It's really not that difficult. But let's see what they think the truth is.
On December 7, 1941, Japanese forces conducted a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, killing approximately 2,500 people and injuring another 1,000.
The cause of that attack? Butt sex and scissoring. That is the truth about same-sex marriage.
Then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt stated that it is a day that will live in infamy. On January 22, 1973, the Supreme Court of the United States legalized the killing of innocent human babies by the process of abortion.
I mean, if you want to be anti-abortion, allowing a form of sex that can't possibly lead to a baby seems like a no-brainer to me. That being said, abortion is a very complex topic that often can't be boiled down to a black and white pro-life versus pro-choice stance. Most people that I have spoken to on the matter have nuanced positions. Abortion is okay until the brain develops. It is okay if the life of the mother is at risk. It is never okay. It is always okay. It is okay up until the point where the fetus can survive outside the mother. It is okay, but only as a last resort. All of these are distinct positions with their own arguments in favor of and against them. Personally, I tend to fall on the okay until the development of the brain, with the caveat that the health, both physical and mental, of the mother is the first priority. But then, even this position is a bit more nuanced than that. There isn't some magical line where it's the last day of the second trimester, better hurry up and abort it before the brain shows up on the first day of the third trimester. All that being said, the cerebrum, which is the part of the brain that basically makes you you and is responsible for thinking, feeling, and remembering, doesn't start to develop until just before the baby is born. So that is why I can caveat my stance with the health and the safety of the mother being primary. The fetus doesn't start to have thoughts, memories, or emotions until just before it is born. So while I recognize the potential that a fetus has to become a person, and I feel that potential should be respected, it should not come at the cost of another person's safety if that other person is unwilling. But let's continue with the video. I'm curious to see how you're going to equate same-sex marriage with the Pearl Harbor attack and abortion.
But friends, absolutely we must add to this list Friday, June the 28th, 2015, as a day that will live in infamy, because on that date, the Supreme Court of the United States made it legal for a man to marry a man and a woman to marry a woman.
Okay, let's just take a moment to look at this from his perspective. Let's pretend that every fetus that has ever been aborted was a fully developed person. I skipped the number, but it was 60 million. So, the days that live in infamy, over 2,400 people die in the Pearl Harbor attack, over 60 million babies killed, and now, a day so bad that it belongs on the same list as these two events. Men are allowed to marry other men, and women are allowed to marry other women. Like, seriously, even if I agreed up to this point, whether the marriage is legal or not, they will pair off and form relationships because that's what humans do. And there will be sexual activity in those relationships because that is also something humans do. Literally nothing changed, except now the government recognizes that those relationships exist. Nobody died, nobody got hurt, and yet that day should live in infamy alongside Pearl Harbor. Give me a break.
And in a 5-4 vote, they in essence forced it upon every state in the country.
They didn't force anything on anyone except the recognition of existence. If you don't like gay marriage, you don't have to participate in gay marriage. You're still allowed to have your straight marriage.
They took God's Word and the Constitution of the United States, and they threw them in the trash can.
Well, seeing as how God's Word is not one of the governing documents of the United States, its opinion on the matter is completely irrelevant. As to the Constitution, there's a reason that there is a process for amending it. The original Constitution didn't even have a Bill of Rights. Should we worship the original Constitution as inerrant? When there is ambiguity in the Constitution, left there explicitly for future protection of unnamed rights, how are we to interpret that when these rights that were unnamed in the past become named and they are now in question? The guys who wrote the Constitution were smart, but they were not omniscient, and they were smart enough to know that they were not omniscient. That is why there are legal ways to change and reinterpret the Constitution. The Constitution was drafted by men who owned slaves. Many of them didn't seem to see the irony of writing a Bill of Rights while owning people as property. Do you suppose that we should use the pre-13th Amendment Constitution, seeing as how the 13th Amendment clearly went against the wishes of the people who wrote the Constitution? How about we just stop worshipping documents and stop pretending not only that they are perfect, but that your specific interpretation of them is the only possible correct interpretation?
I know a lot of patriotic Americans have been feeling less patriotic recently.
I'd say that's a good thing. Patriotism is only really useful as a tool to keep people complacent with a situation that they could change for the better. If I love my country unconditionally, then that means that my country can get away with some seriously messed up shit before I start questioning it. I live in Canada. I think Canada is a pretty good place to live, but I'm also willing to look at the data, and I recognize that it's probably not the best place in the world to live. Of course, that all depends on personal situations, but there are countries where the people are happier, healthier, and live longer. Why should I make excuses for my country and insist that it's the best anyway? Would it not be better to learn from the other countries that I recognize might be better than mine in some ways, and perhaps try to improve my own country as a result of this comparison?
Because they have seen the leadership of this country trample the values that traditionally we have held so dear.
If prohibiting LGBTQ people from having the same rights as everyone else is a value that you hold so dear, then I think a reevaluation of your values is in order.
As a veteran of the United States Air Force, I have always deeply appreciated the sacrifices of soldiers from years gone by, as they have fought for this one nation under God.
That line is insulting to anyone who has served in the military that is not a Christian. Did the Muslim service members fight for one nation under your God? The Hindu ones? The atheist ones? Your implication here is also that the people who serve in the military do so because they don't want the gays to marry. How insulting is that? You're trying to play on people's general respect for service members to suggest that service members would all be against gay marriage, when right now there are around 1 million veterans of the various military branches that would be classified as LGBTQ people. Do you think that the LGBTQ soldiers are fighting against their own right to get married?
But friends, I've got to tell you, lately I've been feeling a lot like Lot.
You've been feeling like offering your daughters up for gang rape by an angry mob? You might want to seek help for that.
You know, in 2 Peter chapter 2, the Bible talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, and then it speaks about Lot. And in verse 8 it says this, "That righteous man dwelling among them tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds."
Yeah, Lot. That righteous man who was judged to be righteous for the act of offering his daughters up to be raped. Sorry, but no, I don't think that was a very righteous act. And just look at verse 7 there. Lot was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. How are they defining being oppressed here? How does two dudes getting married oppress you? How does it affect your life at all? There are people who do things that I consider gross all the time. Their conduct that I might deem filthy does not oppress me. Even if we're talking sexual conduct, there are sex acts that I have no interest in because I think they're gross. But some people do them. Should I feel oppressed by this? No, because it doesn't even come close to affecting my life in any way.
The King James Version says that his soul was vexed daily.
It vexes me. Terribly vexed.
Have you felt that way recently?
Why, yes, I have. But it has nothing to do with LGBTQ people having rights. Hell, I live in Canada. They've been allowed to get married here since 2003, and it has not changed my life in the slightest.
I know I felt that way when I saw the White House of the United States lit up like a rainbow after the Supreme Court decision.
Oh no, it's the pretty colors. They're so oppressing.
Help! Help! I'm being repressed!
Yep, lighting the White House up like a rainbow is definitely the most oppressing thing to happen in American history.
And on the heels of the Supreme Court decision, Nancy Pelosi stated that this is, quote, a declaration of our deepest held values.
If equality under the law is a value that you disagree with, then I think a reevaluation of your values is in order.
Another Congresswoman, Linda Sanchez, simply stated, love wins.
Love wins? How nefarious!
Friends, as disturbing as those statements are to me,
if love wins is a disturbing statement to you, then I think a reevaluation of your values is in order.
what has disturbed me perhaps even more are the things that I have seen since that time.
Yeah, I'll say. Electing a misogynistic, racist xenophobe was bad enough, but seeing that he can get away with pretty much anything without being held accountable is pretty disturbing. Though it is encouraging that, while he does tend to escape any legal consequences for his actions, his schemes usually do seem to fail, probably because of how short-sighted he is. And yeah, I can see you Trump fans typing away about how it's wrong of me to accuse him of misogyny, racism, xenophobia, or short-sightedness. There's no evidence for any of that. Except, of course, for his behavior, his words, and his policies.
Now, what I want to do for the next several minutes is to address some of the things that are being said, but I want to look at them from a biblical perspective.
Because when dealing with modern issues of today's cultures, an ancient Hebrew culture which was vastly different from our own is where we want to look for answers. Not that wisdom can't be found in old writings from other cultures, but we need to treat these old writings as what they are, the representation of a different culture. I don't think it's okay to buy slaves from the nations surrounding Israel, even though it says it's okay in the Bible. Does that mean that the Bible is completely devoid of any advice that could improve our lives? No, it does have some good stuff in it, but it's few and far between. The Bible is far more interesting as a book of cultural significance than as a manual to live your life by.
9 things that we want to cover in the next several minutes. Number 1, homosexuals have a right to be married.
Insofar as marriage is considered a right in general, yes. Discriminating who is allowed to get married based on what equipment they have is just plain silly.
That's one of the things that people are saying. They have a right to be married. But friends, there's a very serious problem with this, and that is they are not married. You see, they were not married on June 27, 2015, and they were not married on June the 28th, 2015. You see, the Supreme Court does not have the right to decide this. Matthew chapter 19 and verse 6 says, "Therefore what God has joined together, let not man separate."
Okay, now we're getting somewhere. You don't think LGBTQ people have the right to get married because their marriages aren't marriages according to what you consider to be a marriage. Fantastic. So, no matter what the courts do, it cannot possibly affect you if you are right. So, what's the point in opposing it? It doesn't violate any of your beliefs, as your beliefs preclude them from being married no matter what the government says.
Friends, this verse tells us something very important about marriage. It tells us that God is the one who does the joining. And so if God doesn't join them, then they are not married.
So whether or not they have the piece of paper from the government makes no difference to you because it has to come from God. Great! You can stop protesting their government contract now, as you are right here saying that it doesn't have any impact on your life or beliefs whatsoever.
And so, in reality, what has been done is God-fearing government officials have now been put into a very tough spot because now the law of the land contradicts the law of God.
Yep. So let's turn to the Bible and see what needs to be done with this. Romans 13, verses 1 through 2. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be the emperor as supreme, or to the governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. Titus chapter 3, verse 1. Remind them to be submissive to the rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work. Seems like the Bible generally says that the governmental authority is given by God, and so should be obeyed. In fact, side note, but Romans 13:6 explicitly tells you to pay taxes, because taxes are how the government pays for their workers, and the government workers are servants of God, because all authority is given by God. So according to the Bible, churches should pay taxes voluntarily, even if they are technically exempt. I wonder if any of them do that.
And you see, these government officials may be subject to penalties if they refuse to perform or assist such weddings. They may be fired or perhaps even worse.
Yeah, if you don't do your job, you get fired. That is a consequence at any job. If you have moral qualms about doing your job, it is your responsibility to leave that job. As a government worker, it is your job to do the thing that the government hired you to do. If that includes giving out marriage licenses, then that is your job. But it's all a moot point anyway. How does giving out a marriage license violate their moral code or religious freedom or whatever if the marriage doesn't count unless it's a straight Christian marriage? You said it yourself. It doesn't matter if the government says they're married. They aren't unless God says they are. So if these are godly public servants who want to do God's will, then handing out a marriage license that won't result in an actual marriage seems, at worst, harmless. They can't be acting against God's will if the government is incapable of performing a marriage against God's will.
But none of this changes the fact that homosexuals are still not married.
See? If they aren't married, then facilitating a pretend marriage that gives them equal legal status as heterosexual couples cannot possibly do any harm, but it does do some good. So the Bible says to obey the government. It also says that only God can marry people. So to me, it looks like if I grant you every single point you've made thus far, we end up with the harmless business of pretend marriages that make people happy and gives them equal rights without doing any harm to your preferred definition of the institution of marriage. Where's the issue? Will he figure out an argument against same-sex marriage that doesn't just boil down to, I think it's yucky? Will he stop equating butt sex with acts of war? Find out tomorrow. Same Rhino time, same Rhino channel.